Last time we had started with Freud's paper on narcissism. And we said that Freud laid the foundation of this concept of narcissism in two ways. He defined something called primary narcissism and he defined something called secondary narcissism. Primary narcissism was a stage in development. Secondary narcissism was a phenomena which happened occasionally for some people. And usually what we call narcissism is actually secondary narcissism. And if we have to use the word primary narcissism, we use the full word primary narcissism. But when we say narcissism, normally we mean secondary narcissism and we don't use the word secondary. When we say narcissism, usually we mean secondary narcissism. We also took a look last time at how we go in the depth of any area in psychotherapy. First time a student hears of the word narcissism, he gets to understand the definition of it, a simple definition of it. Then he gets to know the DSM criteria. And then he struggles to identify them in patients. And slowly he develops that art of identifying somebody with narcissistic personality disorder based upon the symptoms. Deeper than that comes a second stage, that we are able to go deeper into narcissism and then look at how can we classify this narcissistic universe further into types, what we call the typology of narcissism. This is the third step. The fourth step is to go into the causality of narcissism. And look at how various schools in psychoanalysis and outside of psychoanalysis talk about the causality of narcissism. And then we look at the healing part of it. How far can we heal? And what is the way we can heal? So this is what we will cover today. But before we go there, just to anchor our discussion in pathology, we ask the question, this narcissism that we have understood as a concept,
yes,
where does this feature in DSM? In which disorders does it feature? So the first encounter that we have is very obviously narcissistic personality disorder in the chapter on personality disorders. Second, we see it in the chapter on psychosis, the psychosis spectrum disorders, in which when we see schizophrenia or psychosis with negative features, in those cases, some of the cases belong to regression to primary narcissism. That is the second point in DSM where this concept makes an appearance. The third instance where this appears in DSM is in paranoid cases, where because of fragile narcissism, the self disintegrates and one is not able to accept one's limitations in the face of reality. And then when the self breaks, all kinds of projections happen and hypochondria sets in. So both some forms of paranoia will always involve some degree of narcissism. I'm not saying all, but many of them will. Similarly, in case of hypochondria, again we see that a fragile narcissistic self disintegrates. And this is the point where Kohut's theory becomes very useful, because Kohut was the first to say that a fragile narcissistic self, when it disintegrates, because the supports which it had to fuel its inflation are taken away. In simple language, you get a slap of reality, and you are no longer able to maintain your grandiosity. And when that happens, often hypochondria sets in. And this easily can be seen in midlife crisis. It can also be seen in somebody who is a fragile narcissist and who once was very successful but now no longer so. So these are classic hypochondriacal cases. Or somebody is narcissistically connected to somebody and that person dies. And now it sets in, what if what I saw happening to that person happens to me? And secretly in the unconscious, there is identification with that person in order to manage denial of loss. And therefore, both these things set in. It can just be fixation in anxiety of that event, or there may be a denial of loss involved, whereby in the unconscious one identifies with that person. And the hypochondria then becomes a defense against loss. That what had happened to that person has happened to me or will happen to me, and therefore that person is still alive. So people say, okay, after his death, I am becoming more and more like that person. Narcissism also as a concept makes its appearance in depression. And that is seen in two ways. One is, if the narcissistic ego does not get what it wants, it just goes on strike. It's all or nothing. Either I get what I want or I just go on strike. I will not go into reality acceptance. I will not go into any moderation. So this is one way in which narcissism makes an appearance, that a narcissistic ego with strong desires, frustrated, just goes into depression. Second mechanism is the classical Freudian mechanism, in which Freud says that after a loss to which one was narcissistically attached, it is not possible to substitute that loss. It's also not possible to bear that loss and do mourning. So the only way out then is denial of that loss. And the way the loss is denied is, whatever is lost, you take back in and make it a part of yourself. And then what happens is, all the feelings towards that now are feelings towards you. So the aggression towards that person now turns back upon you. And anger turning back on you is one of the classical cases of depression. So in depression, we can see anger-led depression, sadness-led depression, hopelessness-led depression, and a guilt-led depression. And maybe the fifth, medication-led, which is not our domain, but that may be fifth, something biochemical-led completely. But in this classification of anger-centered depression, sadness, we can see the characteristics are different. Like in anger-based depression, usually we will have lack of sleep. In sadness-based depression, usually we will have excess of sleep. In guilt-based depression, there will be usually be self-criticism and lot of self-attack in verbal terms or thought terms or moral terms. In hopelessness-led depression, you will have the primary feeling of everything being meaningless, futile. The futility sets in. It's generalized to everything. So here again, narcissism makes an appearance that if you are narcissistically attached to something and you lose, then one way of depression activates. So narcissism here again becomes a conceptual ingredient in that phenomenon, which creates depression. Narcissism also makes an appearance in many sicknesses where loss denial is at the center. Because loss denial can happen in 100 ways. Managing the loss is one of the most important things. So there are two very important elements in psychic life in pathology. One is loss and second is attack. Very, very primary. Loss and attack. And you can see in 100 disorders, 500 different ways of managing or responding to pathologically to loss or attack. Like if you look at the entire anxiety spectrum, it's full of loss and attack. If you look at depression, it's full of loss and it's attack which is stopped in the way and turns back upon oneself. Lastly, we have midlife crisis. Everyone has midlife crisis, but those with personality disorders, they have a much severe midlife crisis. And that includes narcissistic personality disorder. And that's one of the points where many people have to go through a midlife depression and come out of it after reality acceptance, mourning, and planning for the second innings. This is very important, planning for the second innings. That whatever years are left of life, what do I do with them? Because after 45, this is very, very important. That one is reasonably settled in one's occupation, in society, financially by and large secure. And this becomes a central question of life. Okay, what do I do with my second innings after midlife? So in a way, it's also a point of rejuvenation, that one can rejuvenate oneself and find out one's authentic desire. That if all the profit and fear component is taken away, all the social incentives, disincentives are taken away, what do I like left to myself? And that is very important to know, to find out that what do I like left to myself? What would I do without any goal for its own sake? Something that I like to do and I don't feel stressed doing it. That is very necessary to find one's authentic desire. And that's
I don't feel
stressed.
stressed.
That if I am involved in that activity, hours will pass by and I won't notice. I don't keep looking at the clock when it's going to be over. Because in most activities, we are looking at the clock directly or indirectly. Either physically, we actually look it literally, or in our mind, we are thinking in one corner, when will this be over? And I'll be free from this. So there we are looking indirectly at the clock. So midlife crisis is one more element where narcissism makes an appearance. So if you look at DSM in all these areas, Freud's concept of narcissism makes an appearance.
Can I ask some doubts of you?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Uh, this was a general sort of a question. How do we distinguish between self, ego, and identity?
Okay. Uh, Ego is very clear
Uh,
that it is a structural and functional agency of the mind
mhm.
which helps the person in adapting to the environment and surviving. And for this, what the ego has to do is to broker a compromise between the id and the superego in the context of the environment. So, ego is very clear. It has to create a compromise between id and the superego in the context of the environment to enhance adaptability and survival. Now, self is differently described by many people. Freud uses the word self in a very loose, ordinary, colloquial way. It's not a technical term for Freud. So when the Freud says narcissistic self, he just means a narcissistic personality. He's not using the word self in any technical way. He's using it like any other word. But when Jung and Kohut use the word self, or Winnicott uses the word self, they have a very behind it. So the word self has various meanings in psychoanalysis based upon which school are you into. In the Freudian framework, it does not have any particular meaning except the normal colloquial meaning. It's not a technical word for Freud. For Jung, self is the coordinator of the whole personality. So when we study Jung's model of the mind, and we will do it, we will see that there is a self in the center. Around the self is the collective unconscious filled with archetypes. And around that is the personal unconscious. And around that is the persona. And the ego is in the persona. And then what happens is Jung draws a line from the ego to the self and says the stability of ego self axis is central to mental health.
Sir, can you please repeat the coordinator of whole personality? That is what self is for Jung, which is surrounded by archetypes.
Yeah. So the
And
Jung has like a 3-4 layered idea of the model of the mind. So it's like this. Let's say self is in the center, one sphere. Around that is collective unconscious. And collective unconscious is populated with archetypes.
Yes.
Right? And outside of the collective unconscious, one more circle you can draw, the personal unconscious. And outside of the personal unconscious, one more circle you can draw, the conscious. And in the conscious, you locate the ego, which is very different from Freud's location of the ego. For Freud, ego is partly conscious, partly unconscious. It's in the both compartments. But Jung places it completely in the conscious. And he draws a line from the ego to the self. It is very important in Jungian therapy called ego-self axis, which in simple words means how deeply are we authentic and how far our persona, which is a front put up for society, is in connection backwards with ourself. So that is Jung's idea of the self. So for Jung, self is a structural entity. It's a very much a part of the model of the mind. It's not phenomenological. It is not that only if X phenomena happens, the self will emerge. It's a structural entity, so it's embedded in the very structure of the mind. Inborn, innate. For Kohut, self is something which is both structural and functional, and it is created in the process of early life experience. And therefore, based upon early life experience, one ends up creating either a healthy self or a unhealthy self. And unhealthy self is divided into three: psychotic self, borderline self, and narcissistic self. So for Kohut, it has a very different meaning what the word self means. And Kohut's entire psychology is called self-psychology. And irony is, although he has created a full school called self-psychology, he could never define very exactly the word self. When Winnicott uses the word self, he means it in the context of the true self and the false self. Meaning, if we feel safe in childhood, the real us is able to live itself out, and our journey to maturity is organic and time appropriate, and we feel safe to be ourselves. However, if the environment is not very good, we are forced to put up a false self in the front, to adapt to the environment, to please others, to save ourselves from the attacks of the others, to survive, and so on. And Winnicott feels that one of the core objectives of therapy is to move from the false self to the true self. So for Winnicott, both of them are phenomenological. They are not structures of the mind. They happen to get created in the process of living, and it's highly conditional. If the environment is not very difficult, you may not have a strong false self. It's very contingent upon environment. So his self is very different from Kohut's self, is very different from Jung's self, is very different from the way Freud colloquially uses the word self. So there's a whole range of meanings of the word self in psychoanalysis. And the third is what you said was identity. That is more like a set of identifications we have, a set of identifications that our ego has. In the context of the social operation. In one way, it is uniqueness, but in another way, it's an agglomeration, accumulation of so many identifications which all put together constitute what we think we are.
That means identity is fully conscious.
Most of the times it is used in that way. Some sociologists will use it in a different way and say that part of our identity is unconscious. That even if consciously we wish to change it, we can't really change it. So then they will divide it into a surface identity and a deep identity. But the word identity actually is very fluid and loaded with multiple meanings.
Because we use the word cultural identity in cultural formulation. And then that was difficult for patients to answer and difficult also for the clinicians to ask this question. What do you exactly mean by cultural identity?
Because it's not a clean concept.
No.
The concept is still in the formative work in progress stage, where we are
Conglomerate.
not actually clear said identity means A, B, C, D, E and nothing else. It's still being churned out and used in multiple ways. And that was the difficulty also with, I think DSM tried to use this in narcissistic personality disorder. That they had created two alternatives. One was the classical set of criteria, and second was A and B. And in one was this B had this identity. It was very difficult for everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It is very exhaustive and very important.
So now let us look at the DSM-5 criteria of narcissistic personality disorder and the psychoanalytic explanation of each of those criteria. The first criteria is grandiose sense of self-importance. First criteria of NPD. Now, why will that happen? Psychoanalytically, we will say it's overinvestment of libido in the self. Self here is in the normal sense of the word self. You can use the word ego. Preoccupation with fantasies of success or power. It is the search for omnipotence, which is a defense against helplessness. The early life helplessness you defend against by this omnipotence. Belief that one is special or superior. It is again the search for omnipotence, but the defense is against inferiority. Need for excessive admiration. It's a defense against early life rejection and abandonment. Sense of entitlement. It is again regression to omnipotence and a defense against powerlessness and a thought that one is not good enough, one deserves to be dumped. And the reaction formation to that is one has a sense of entitlement. Interpersonally exploitative behavior. The unconscious dynamic is that one finds it difficult to separate oneself from others. One fuses again and again. The movement from the oceanic phase to the object phase has not been very clear. So what happens? The other is seen as an extension of oneself, made for oneself. Kohut uses a very good term for it. He calls it self-object. Self-object. It's a one word, not two words, one word.
Self-object.
Yeah, self-object. It's the complete thing is one word. And he says we all need self-object experiences early in life. And for that, we need objects around us who are ready to become our self-objects. Like one mind and two bodies. Like a small child says, now you become a horse, and somebody becomes a horse. So the child has a self-object experience. That there is somebody who will do whatever he says. And Kohut says, if you don't have adequate self-object experiences, then you try to do it in therapy. And therefore he says, don't interpret, let him have those experiences.
Tries to do that in therapy, client or the therapist?
The patient will try to have self-object experiences with the therapist, making the therapist an object. And the classical psychoanalytic therapist will interpret it. But Kohut says, don't interpret it, let him have the experience. When he's satisfied, he'll automatically move out of it naturally. Because he sees that as a developmental arrest not as something which has to be interpreted into reality. So he doesn't see it as a fantasy to reality movement, rather as a developmental arrest. Yeah.
Used to believe that this is how I began my practice. It was necessary for me to have patients because I used to get only one patient a day initially. So it might have come from that survival need, but I would let the patient do whatever the patient wanted to do to me. And then after 4 or 5 sessions, I would ask the patient, why did you feel the need to do this to me? And
You are a natural Kohutian.
yeah, that is how I realize now. And then I thought it is good that if you do it devoid of your own personal insult, feeling insulted and personal feeling, then it works well with the patients. They can see themselves why did they behave like that and bring about the necessary improvement.
So your technique is naturally Kohutian.
हम्म. चोळामोळा करून टाकला पेशंटनी माझा. आणि मग मी त्याला विचारलं, का तू असं चोळामोळा करतो माझा? मी काय केलं तुला?
काय सांगितलं?
नाही, असं वेगळ्या वेगळ्या प्रश्न त्यांच्या त्यांच्या ह्याच्यामध्ये विचारलं. दॅट हेल्प्स देम आणि देअर बिहेवियर इम्प्रूव्ह इन द थेरपी. We used to see a relative of mine who is my आहे ना वेळ 2 मिनिटं बोलू ना?
Yeah, please go on.
Yeah.
So I can't hear you again. Hello.
Then sister's husband
Hmm.
has bipolar, and I used to bipolar disorder, and I used to see him. And my cousin sister is very dominating, and all of us know that. And his fellow was government servant. And after he got retired, one day he comes and tells me that wife is very insulting and she is very dominating and she is very pleasing for the children, but very insulting to me. And this is narrating to his doctor, who also happens to be his wife's cousin brother. So I am in a fix. So intuitively, I asked him, will you die first or will your wife die first? He
Hmm.
said, what is this question? I
Right.
said, I'll tell you what is this question. But do women live longer or men live longer? He said, women live longer. I said, then what will she do after you die? He said, why? Kids will look after her. And I said, that's what she is doing. She's showing ingratiating behavior to them, pleasing them, and insulting you because you have done your job. You are retired. All women are like that. Sorry for this sexist statement, but that obviously satisfied him to some extent. And then I got a call from my cousin sister who never comes with him. I haven't seen her in years. And she called me and said, I understood, I got to know what you told my husband, and I have made appropriate change in my behavior. I said, thank you. What can I say?
So the interpersonally exploitative behavior comes where the person feels because of his omnipotence he can get away. And idealization, de-idealization is at work. And often sadism is at work. And it's very important to note that in many cases, sadism is a way out of depression. That if this sadistic route was blocked, the aggression may easily turn back upon oneself.
Is the same as devaluation also?
Sorry?
Idealization is the same as a devaluation?
Devaluation is a part of de-idealization.
Okay. And there are other components to it?
Yes, because um, You can use the word devaluation because that process definitely is internal to de-idealization. But the context in which this is used is when the split is open, extreme thinking is on, and somebody is seen as all good or all bad. So you can put devaluation plus extreme thinking, and that's very close to de-idealization. And this is very common in all personality disorders and the entire psychotic spectrum. So idealization and de-idealization, it's just that who is idealized and who is de-idealized. Like in narcissism, the self is idealized, the other is de-idealized. In dependence, the self is de-idealized, the other is idealized. In histrionicity, in general, the other is idealized when one is chasing the other and acting dramatic so as to seduce. And the moment the other follows, the self is idealized. So it is just that the phenomena flips. It's like you can think of two lights, one yellow and one green, and this is put on this and this is put on this, and very fluid, fungible kind of currencies. Lack of empathy, this is also a criteria. This is covered up sensitivity. The rage against the other and omnipotence, the three put together, because the man is terrified of uncovering the sensitivity. Of course, along with rage and omnipotence. Envy of others or belief others envy them. The envy of others, because if there is anything good in the other, it develops cracks in the omnipotence. And if the omnipotence cracks, then one will fall from the mountaintop straight into the valley. And any good that you see outside of yourself is like strong wind blowing when you are on a mountaintop. It shakes you. And you are terrified of falling down. So anything good seen outside of oneself is a challenge to one's omnipotence. And that's terrifying. Because this omnipotence is a defense against complete inferiority, helplessness. The valley state.
For the dependent personality, this may not be much of a threat. Seeing good in others and omnipotence in others, in fact, makes one more object available to me to depend on.
Correct. So in dependent, the difficulty is in owning the goodness in oneself. And that has two points there, because the moment you own up the goodness in yourself, the idealization, de-idealization, extreme digital difference that stops. In the sense the split is open, is slowly closing. And that does 2-3 things, because if you own up goodness in yourself, the other who was all good till now, when you said that you are good for nothing, that all good now is no longer all good. And when that happens, 2 things happen. One, the protection of the omnipotence goes. Second, the responsibility on the self comes. Independent responsibility. And third, the ecstasy of identifying with the omnipotence goes. So the protection of omnipotence going creates terror. The responsibility falling on oneself creates fear. And the other no longer being omnipotent creates a loss of ecstasy. So the dependent maintains that I am good for nothing, you are all good. I am more comfortable in this situation. And therefore, the difficulty is in owning goodness in oneself. And this also is a defense against anger towards the parents. Because there is a lot of anger towards the parents and probably towards many people who are important in life. And the fear is that if that anger is owned up, it is so much, it will come out and I will lose them. And the greatest terror to a dependent is loss. Loss of people and facing the vacuum. That attachment vacuum, human vacuum is most terrifying. So in order to avoid the vacuum of people, the dependent has to keep the anger towards other repressed. And I am not good enough helps with rationalizing that when somebody does not do anything good, one can say, okay, maybe I deserved it. I must have done something wrong. So it's a way to protect the other from one's anger. Arrogant or haughty behavior, that's also rooted in omnipotence of primary narcissism and secondary narcissism both. The outcome is rules don't apply. I am something special. That in the heart of his hearts, the narcissist believes he is above the rules. He may have to reconcile in the face of reality, but in his heart he believes he is above the rules. So the omnipotence, sadness, I am special, rules don't apply, that results in this arrogant and haughty behavior. So this is how we see all the criteria given in DSM-5-TR, how you can psychoanalytically explain the genesis of each of these criteria. You're saying something.
I was wondering if Donald Trump and his current behavior and political podcast from the US that criticize him, do all of them depict this and does all this take one on an inescapable spiral like compulsive gambler so that it ends only either in the prison or in the suicide?
Correct.
And was it perhaps different for Hitler or was it similar?
Hitler was similar.
Hmm.
Like you can say all the leaders who were in historical movements, all of them had huge narcissism. Whether it is Churchill, Hitler, Stalin, Montgomery, Rommel, Patton, Eisenhower.
I don't know much about these leaders, but I remember right now that there was an article by Ising which came in the Sunday edition of Indian Express, as far as I remember. And it said that don't throw away astrology unless you have examined it scientifically. Because you have not examined it, then you don't call it superstition.
Correct.
And in that way, even otherwise, even scientists are working for emotional satisfaction only.
That is true.
Yeah.
It is true. It's impossible to be a logic machine.
Hmm. Hmm.
No human being can be a logic machine. He may be in the terms of expression, but nobody can be there at the level of motivation.
Experience. Hmm.
In terms of motivation and in terms of the final achievement of what is achieved, nobody can be non-emotional. So the genesis of action and the conclusion of action will always be in some motivational sphere.
Check your WhatsApp after this call for further updates.
So this is how we look at the narcissistic personality disorder in terms of the criteria given in DSM and explaining them primarily in Freudian terms. If we take Kohut, we will give a very different explanation of each of these criteria. If we take Jung, we will give very different explanation. So all schools of psychoanalysis will have a different explanation of each of the criteria. Now let us go deeper into the typology of narcissism. And here, okay. So this is a monograph I had written once on narcissism called The Mirror in the Water. So I'll take some part from here.
Mirror in the water is perhaps like the story of Narcissus, who
Correct.
kept on watching his image in the water and died.
Correct. So it comes from two sources, the title. One is the story of Narcissus, and second is the idea of mirroring from Kohut. So let us first look at what different people mean in psychoanalysis when they talk of narcissism. Okay. Stolorow has reviewed all the meanings that different theories gave to the word narcissism, and he has come to 4 common meanings or 4 different ways in which narcissism is used. One, some people used it very early times as a sexual perversion, meaning autoeroticism, that one treats one's own body as an object of desire. Second, as a mode of relating to objects, that the object is an extension of us, is meant for us. Third, as a developmental stage, which Kohut says that we are all narcissists at some stage in the development. Some people pass through it healthily, others are arrested. And those who are arrested, they remain narcissists. It's almost like Margaret Mahler's concept of universal autism, that we are all autistic at some point and we grow out of it, and some remain arrested in that developmental phase. That is the idea here, that some people have called it a developmental stage. And many people see it essentially as a self-esteem regulation problem. That on a scale of 0 to 10, both the narcissist and the dependent, they think in terms of 0 or 10. So in case of narcissist, I am 10 and you are 0. And in dependence, I am 0 and you are 10. But reality is all human beings are in the range of 4 to 8. And the self-esteem keeps moving in this healthy range, normal healthy range. But both the narcissist and the dependent find it very difficult to accept that this is the normal healthy range and it's fine to be here. Both want to be on the extremes. And they are into this mountaintop valley phenomena. Either you are 10 out of 10 or you are 0 out of 10. So those who focus on this aspect, they say it is essentially at the center a self-esteem regulation problem. So there are different ways in which this word narcissism has been used. Now let us go into the typology of it. Different people have divided narcissism further into subtypes. And there are many typologies, many people have worked upon it. But I have taken some of them which I liked. So one is Groupman and Cooper's typology of 2006, Theodore Mills 2013, Fromm's 47, Reisman's 50, Kohut 11, 2011, and Bain Bernstein 1982. So we will not go into all of them, but I'll just take a sample. So let us say we take Theodore Mills' typology of 2013. So he divides narcissists in these subgroups. 1, unprincipled narcissist. 2, amorous narcissist. Compensatory narcissist. Elitist narcissist and malignant narcissist. And what are the characteristics?
So
Sorry?
it's not there on the slide. The slide is different.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want, I'll send it to you.
Yes, sir. Please.
So,
I'm sorry, interrupted you.
yeah, no, perfectly okay. The unprincipled narcissist, especially on the sociopathy, psychopathy kind of spectrum, he may include antisocial features. So central description of this subtype is including antisocial features. What are the personality traits? Deficient conscience, unscrupulous, amoral, disloyal, fraudulent, deceptive, and so on.
Is it amoral or immoral? Because DSM took pride in saying that we are amoral.
You are right.
Govindam.
You are right. It's a mistake. It's immoral, not amoral.
Yes.
It's immoral. You are right. It's a mistake here. It's immoral. Amorous. So this is more like a ethically driven classification. This one is more based upon histrionicity. It may include histrionic feature, sexually seductive, enticing, always there for relationships and so on. But given to pathological lying and swindling, it's like a mixture of histrionic and antisocial features. Compensatory narcissist. He has negativistic and avoidant features. Tries to keep out of deep feelings. Has illusions of being superior. Admirable, noteworthy. Elitist narcissist. Feels privileged, empowered by virtue of special childhood status or something. And malignant ones, who is out there to do something evil to you or somebody else. It may include antisocial, sadistic, paranoid, anti-national, all sorts of people, the malignant types. So this is how he divides the narcissist into one typology. Then you have Fromm's typology. We won't go into it. Raymond's typology. Let us look at Kohut's typology. Because two people have done a lot of work on narcissism. One is Kohut and second is Kernberg. So Kernberg on the classical side and Kohut on the non-classical side of psychoanalysis. And there was a very long Kohut-Kernberg debate on narcissism. Went on for decades. Now neither of them is there, but it went on for decades, the classical Kohut-Kernberg debate on narcissism. So Kohut divides narcissists into 5. The mirror-hungry personalities who are in lookout for admiration. The 5 A's. The 5 A's of acknowledgement, attention, affection, admiration. Sorry. Acknowledgement, attention, acceptance, affection, admiration. So these are the mirror-hungry personalities. Then ideal-hungry personalities who are looking out for somebody idealistic. Some guru, some teacher, somebody. Alter ego personalities who are looking out for somebody who is what they would have been, somebody very like them. Merger-hungry personalities, those who are looking out for self-object experiences and constantly want to fuse with others. And fifth is contact shunning personalities, the avoidant types. They want to live in the world of their own, but the moment something has to be done, the catastrophic thinking starts. And they become extremely anxious. They also fear people and attack from people, also fear loss. So this constant fear of attack, loss, and one's own inferiority and catastrophic thinking makes them shun contact with personalities. So Kohut has this typology. Now, if you look into all personality disorders can have this kind of typologies. So when you go in detail of any personality disorder, you always look into what is the definition. So there are many definitions. 2, typologies. How does it manifest in society? The typologies. 3rd, causation. And 4th, healing. So if you look into, for example, borderline, people are divided borderline into 4 different types. Histrionic, another 3-4 different types. So every personality disorder can be divided further into groups. So when you go in details of any personality disorder, almost like a super specialization, then you get into this kind of issues, that how can we divide them? What are the core psychoanalytic phenomena we see in all of them? What are the core feelings which come up in all of them? How do they behave in therapy, these different subtypes? So this goes into the Kernberg and Kohut debate. Yeah, this one, Kernberg and Kohut.
This is the same slide, typology of narcissism, 7 typologies.
Yeah.
That is what is on my screen.
Okay, now can you see?
It's still the same screen, sir.
It's not changing?
No. We may stop sharing and start again.
No, I think I should be able to reload it. Can you see it now?
Yeah, Greenberg and Kohut, 2.3.7.
Correct.
Yeah.
So this is the famous debate which went on for decades. And They had a lot of differences, but they had agreement on 5 issues. The first is that narcissistic pathology is analyzable. It is not that nothing can be done, provided the person comes for therapy long enough. The second, that grandiosity is a central feature. Third, that grandiosity inevitably will emerge in therapy. Fourth, that aggression will come up in therapy. And fifth, the therapist will have to deal with counter-transferential issues where he is de-idealized as if he does not exist. And rage is put into him. And the patient wants to control the therapy. So these are some important aspects of it. There is also one important point that on transference, which is very important, related to narcissism. Initially, Freud thought that psychotics and narcissists will not make any transference. And the idea was that the psychotic has already created a world of his own. There is nothing repressed. So what is there to transfer? You transfer when something is repressed. But a psychotic has already created a world of his own. But later on, he came to realize that despite all that the psychotics do, they still make transferences, and very strong transferences. In fact, in many cases, far stronger than neurotics.
Yes.
The second, he also thought that narcissists will not make transferences, because he thought that the libido was completely invested in the self, and therefore it will never go out towards the therapist to get into transferences. But this is not what we see. We see that definitely transferences happen. Not only they happen, but they happen in 2 ways. One, normal transferences happen, and second, self-object transferences happen, which is what Kohut talks about, that there are some unique kind of transferences in case of narcissistic personalities. So when we do Kohut, we will get to know the self-object transferences, but this also happens. So on this point, what Freud said has been completely got modified in the course of development. One more typology is very important. Overt narcissist, covert narcissist, and covert passive-aggressive narcissist. Overt narcissist is something which we know, that somebody is just out and out a narcissist, has no reservations. He lives out his narcissism in the open. Take it or leave it. The covert narcissist is a hidden narcissist. He is a narcissist, but he does not have the assets by which society will allow him to live out the narcissism. So what he does is, he represses it and leaves it by identification. So the covert narcissist finds out an overt narcissist and acts as a dependent when actually he is not a dependent. He puts up the show of a dependent and lives by identification. Over a period of time, when he progresses in his own career or in terms of money or power, The hidden narcissist comes out from the covert narcissist. And then the overt and the covert separate because the contract is off. Overt wanted a dependent, which covert had become once. But now he has come onto his own. So now he wants the overt to become dependent, which cannot happen. And this is how many divorces happen actually. That in the college, on the college campus, there is an overt narcissist and a covert narcissist. One is a boy and one is a girl. And often the covert is a boy who is more worldly wise to become a covert. And he lives out his narcissism by identification with an overt female narcissist. They get married. After some time, when he comes on his own in terms of money and power in the organization, the hidden narcissist comes out. And now he wants his wife to become a dependent, which is not possible. So now you have two narcissists living together, both wanting the other to be dependent, which is not possible for either. And usually it results in a divorce. The worst form is the covert passive aggressive. Because you can have covert in two types, only covert and covert passive aggressive. Covert passive aggressive will not only result in divorce with an overt, but he will throw the overt into such deep depression that one should not be surprised if the depressed overt starts getting suicidal ideation. This can go to that extent.
Depressed, overt or covert?
The covert passive aggressive narcissist
will throw the overt into depression by disowning, by separating.
By passive aggressive acts. The projective identification mechanism which is used is used to put one's aggression into somebody else passively. So irritation is one of the most common modes. That they will make you feel so irritated, but they will always have plausible deniability. So they will work in the realm of plausible deniability. It's very subtle, very insidious. Like you talk to some people and you become extremely angry. And when you reflect, what did he say? You can't find anything. And if you tell that person, why are you so irritating? He will ask you, what have I done? Please tell me, I will improve myself. Because everything is so insidious and so unconscious, so subtle, so camouflage. And this is a speciality of the covert passive aggressive narcissist. He will get you fly into rage by depositing anger in you, by trying to play stupid, by ignoring what you say. Like, what are the strategies they use? One is stupidity. It's a feigned stupidity. They are not actually stupid. Second, talking something irrelevant. Third, in a subtle way, countering your argument. Whatever you say, opposing it. In a subtle way. Fourth, coming in your way whenever you take a decision. Fifth, themselves feeling very anxious and pushing the aggression into you or anxiety into you. And sixth, without doing anything, just pushing anxiety and aggression into you unconsciously. And because they are always in plausible deniability, they can always escape. So if you call a third person, nobody will be able to judge if they have done anything wrong. Because everything is so subtle, so covert. And this leads to very serious outcomes. I have seen people having suicidal ideation. I have seen people even having schizophrenia. out of the bottled rage by living with a covert passive aggressive narcissist. I have seen many daughters, including many of them doctors, that their fathers were covert passive aggressive narcissistic people, and many of them sugar sweet on the surface. In fact, they would say it's difficult to find a good man like my father, but he is the actual one who is responsible for her becoming schizophrenic. It's very difficult to accept if we look at the biochemical origin of schizophrenia. But if you accept the bottled up rage as schizophrenia, it becomes easy to have this explanation. So the covert passive aggressive narcissist can't be taken lightly. And if there is anybody near you, run for your life. Don't try to heal, don't try to do anything unless he is ready for a sincere long-term treatment. If he is not ready, run for your life. One of my discussions on my channel is titled in Hindi, Covert Passive Aggressive Narcissist, Jaan Bacha Ke Bhago. You will go crazy with them. So this typology is very important in practice. Overt narcissist, and covert passive aggressive narcissist. Should we break for a cup of tea?
Yes. I wanted to have one word about the subtypes listed above, that most of the paraphilias have narcissistic personalities. So they
Hello?
fragment their libido
Can
so
you,
that
I lost your statement. Most of the paraphilic personalities.
narcissistic personalities.
Sorry?
Narcissistic personalities. Just a moment. I will just put the Bluetooth off. I hope that will work. I don't know.
It's okay now. You can say it. The voice is coming through.
Yes, I said paraphilias, persons with paraphilias have narcissistic personality disorders
Correct.
more often,
True.
and uh, the way they fragment their libido into part objects,
Yes.
that is how they become either exhibitionist or sadistic or masochistic or something like that.
Correct.
Is it like that? And that could
Yeah,
be
that's
studied.
true. That's true.
Mm.
In Freudian terms, we will say it's regression back to the stage of component instincts.
Component instincts.
Before they all came together under the overall umbrella of genital section, adult section. Somehow that confederation is broken and everything is back to its original separate disjointed state. And each part is now living out its own. So they are no longer at the service of adult sexuality. They have themselves become the purposes of sexuality. So, in fact, this brings up a very important point that we hardly find a pure personality disorder.
Yes.
In most cases, you have a mixture of different things to different intensities. And this may have to do with what I have always been saying. It points to a possible fact that the causation of different personality disorders is not different. It is one trauma to which different people are coping differently based upon the different variables in the personality structure. And of course, the nature of the trauma. Like different people respond to loss in different ways. Different people respond to attack in different ways. So same loss will make one person go narcissistic, another dependent, the third histrionic. All of them are coping up with early life loss, but the coping way is different. And it also depends upon what was the nature of the trauma and what were the resources available to the system to cope.
Yes.
Like in psychosis, the trauma has been the most difficult.
Sorry.
If you talk in terms of intensity of trauma, right, which will involve how early it was, how deep it was, how enduring it was, and what were the resources available for the system to cope. If you have these four variables constituting the trauma effect, then the worst trauma effect will result in psychosis. The second worst will be borderline. The third worst will be dependent. Fourth will be histrionic. Fifth will be narcissist. And of course, you can put others in somewhere in that spectrum. But we see the difference in the trauma effect and the coping mechanisms of the system, they result in different personality disorders. And therefore, it is quite possible, and it's actually true, that most people will have mixed personality disorders.
Like vitamin deficiencies, they say.
Correct.
They rarely come alone. They come in groups.
So because the idea there is that somehow generically in metabolism something is not okay. So that affects everything. So that kind of thing, that generically in coping with a trauma, different responses are given, and this set of responses crystallize as different personality disorders or their traits. So that allows us to think about a common origin of different personality disorders. That it is not that they are unrelated, disjointed, separate, independent entities originating in very different ways, unrelated to each other, but rather the idea that all of them are originating from one or two phenomena. And there is a convergence in origin when you look at all the personality disorders. Now, the convergence may be to one root or to two roots, but not as many as they are. They are not unrelated. They are like coping mechanisms to a few elemental traumatic situations. So, should we break for a cup of tea for 10 minutes?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We come to the last part of it, understanding the causation and the healing approach to narcissism. So two thinkers who have contributed a great deal after Freud are Kohut and Kernberg. Kohut has an approach which is called the self-psychology approach, because he created this self-psychology, a distinct school within psychoanalysis. And Kernberg is more classically oriented psychoanalyst and conceptually Klein heavy. So when we get into causality and healing to narcissism, we can take any of the approaches: Freudian, Kleinian, Kohutian, Winnicottian, self-esteem, or existential. So let us look at what they mean. In terms of causality, The Freudian approach goes into two things: primary narcissism, secondary narcissism. And therefore, the core of Freudian therapy is reality acceptance. Overcome grandiosity by interpretation. Accept the limitations of reality and give up the regression to primary narcissism. So the core approach is reality acceptance through interpretation. In Klein, the approach is not different in terms of technique. It is still the same: reality acceptance by interpretation. But the conceptual part is different. The causality, according to the Kleinian approach, is the self representation in the psychic world gets identified with the omnipotent all-good breast. So the causation of narcissism is different. That in this psychic world, we are represented by a self-representation. And there is this idea of an omnipotent all-good entity. And the two get fused. So it is the identification with the omnipotent which causes the inflation of self-esteem. So for them, for the Kleinians, narcissism essentially is caused by identification of the self-image inside, or self-representation inside, with something omnipotent all good. That the split is open, and one side of the split is the omnipotent all good and the omnipotent all bad, and the self-representation identifies with that omnipotent all good, and therefore starts thinking of oneself as omnipotent. So that's a very different idea in causation. In Kohut's approach, it is arrest on the developmental path. That when you are naturally supposed to live out your narcissism, have self-object experiences, you were not allowed to do so. When you required admiration, attention, affection, you were denied those things. And therefore, the early life deprivations and attacks, either attacks of omission or attacks of commission, they have caused a developmental arrest. And therefore, the idea is not to interpret one's grandiosity initially, but to allow one to live it out. That's a fundamental difference. The classical approach of Freud, Klein, Bion, and most of psychoanalysis will be to interpret grandiosity and bring it to the notice of the patient that reality is something else, not what he believes. His grandiosity is not reality. But Kohutian approach is different. He allows the patient to live out that grandiosity, does not interpret it, holds back interpretation. So it's a very long approach. And only when the person is ready, the route of interpretation is taken. Winnicott's approach is slightly different. Winnicott sees this as a false self which was created to deal with the world. So this grandiose self is a false self. And the whole idea is to find the true self and provide the patient safety enough that he feels safe to first live out his false self and then move towards the true self. The self-esteem approach is a very different approach. The focus there is on self-esteem. That what are the components of one's self-esteem? How are you deriving your self-esteem? And at what point in time, which of these components went into deprivation? And how are you compensating now? For example, take a hypothetical example. 3 brothers. The eldest brother starts a business, grows it very much. But he is a very benevolent type, so he doesn't keep much in his own name. He helps his younger brothers to develop. He is a very good mentor, a very selfless person. Whatever profits comes, he buys property in the name of younger brothers. He gives them money to start their own businesses. He also gives some of his well-established businesses to them. And for himself, he starts a new business from a scratch, which involves all the struggle. So his personality is a do-gooder. There is a dependent part of his personality. Very benevolent. That struggle for myself and ease for the other. At the same time, there is a narcissistic part also, because of which he is able to start businesses, go out in the market, be very effective, be very impressive and develop his business. So both the components are there. Narcissism in the front and dependence in the bottom. It's a mixed personality. So very good businessman because of his narcissism and very benevolent because of his dependence. Now, after some years, younger brothers develop and their businesses grow much larger than his businesses. And they slowly start neglecting him, ignoring him. And he starts thinking it's very ungrateful that once I was in the center of this house and now I'm in the corner. And his sources of self-esteem were that he was a successful businessman. Everyone respected him in society. And he was a mentor to his brothers. They were looking up to him as their mentor, giving him great importance. Now, that source of self-esteem is gone, where the brothers are not paying any attention to him. They are ungrateful. They keep spending on their own without asking him anything. And as luck would have it, their businesses grow far more than his business. So his sources of self-esteem were business success and the respect from the brothers. And that was a narcissistic part of him, which was getting fuel from these two sources to create his self-esteem. So his own business success in society, his respect because of mentorship, his respect because he was giving money, his respect because he was giving ready-made businesses to brothers, and his respect of being center of the household. Everyone looked up to him as somebody very positive, do-gooder, a very selfless, great man. And the dependent part of him got support from the fact that I am strongly attached to my brothers and they are always with me and they are capable. So the dependent part was stabilized by attachment to the capable brothers, and the narcissistic fragile part was stabilized by these sources of self-esteem. Now, the brothers start neglecting him, and once or twice he has a fight with the brothers. And suddenly he becomes anxious, starts developing panic attacks, and starts developing hypochondriacal tendencies. So what has happened is his sources of self-esteem have suddenly dried up. His support to the dependent part has been withdrawn, and a delicate equilibrium is now in inequilibrium state. So this would be the kind of approach of the self-esteem part, that why is the person grandiose? What are his components of self-esteem? And how do you move him to accept the real zone, the real healthy zone of self-esteem, which on a 10-point scale will be 5 to 7 or 4 to 7 for everybody. So how to move from these extremes of self-esteem into the healthy zone, that will be the focus of the self-esteem approach. In Winnicott, it will be movement from the false self to the true self. The last approach is the existential approach to narcissism. It looks at narcissism as something very natural. That if you don't have narcissism, how do you deny this constant anxiety of death, this constant anxiety of loss, the constant anxiety of pain, the constant anxiety of attack and so on? That the human condition is so fragile that human beings can't live without using defenses of denial, repression, and grandiosity to some extent. The helplessness is so deep in human condition that the only way out of our helplessness is some sort of grandiosity. And therefore, it's a very natural human feature. Second argument is that the way children are brought up now, everyone is facing object loss, because the modern society is a very nuclear society and an isolated society. Isolated from people, isolated from nature, isolated from mythology. And in such a situation, to experience object loss and to go narcissistic is very natural. So they look at narcissism as a part of the current human condition, and part of it as eternal human condition. So they look at it very differently, in the sense that if you go to a existential psychotherapist, they do a lot of self-revelation. So if a patient comes and says, I am suffering from narcissism, or people tell me I am suffering from narcissism, the therapist might say, I also have this thing. I cope up in this way. Let me know what you do. Because it's a more dialectic, self-revealing approach.
The video you shared in the meantime, fathers and sons, that also had the same approach. The
Correct.
therapist also shares his.
Right. A lot of self-revelation happens.
Mhm. And sir, you said about human condition. This word is often used in psychology, in psychiatry.
Correct.
Human condition. Characterized by which all things you said? Loss, attack?
Loss, attack, helplessness,
Uh-huh.
anxiety,
Uh-huh.
and confusion.
Deprivation.
Yeah, deprivation, confusion,
Mm-hmm.
purposelessness, absurdity. These are the classical themes of existential philosophy. So if you read existential philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard, Sartre, Heidegger, they go into this kind of issues of meaninglessness, absurdity, anxiety, death, inevitability. being thrown into existence and finding oneself that one has been thrown into existence. The everyday dilemmas, a constant sense of melancholy, which often starts with you after the middle period of life.
Which period of life?
Mid period of life.
Middle period of life.
If, for example, if you look at the book title of the books, let us say Kierkegaard has written some of the good books. Titles are very interesting. Like one of the title of his books is Either or. The second is Sickness unto Death.
Hmm.
So the themes that they are dealing with is this: the human condition. When they describe the human condition as being characterized by thrownness into existence. That finding oneself in circumstances, much of it is beyond our control. Anxiety, melancholia, despair, absurdity, longing, rootlessness, meaninglessness, triviality, banality. Faith,
Why faith?
because existential movement gets divided into two, the theistic and the agnostic. And Kierkegaard is a theistic existentialist. So for him, faith is central. That even in the middle of meaninglessness, I am free to have faith. Even in the middle of purposelessness, I am still free to have faith.
Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha.
So those are the ideas which go with this phrase, the human condition. That this is the human condition, and some characteristics of what is called the human conditions are eternal. Some are contingent to the times. If you just want to spend 5 minutes, let me just bring those existential things here.
Ask you a question while you are doing something different there?
Sorry?
Or should I? Can I ask you a question or should I wait until you search what you are doing?
No, please go on. Please go on.
Self-esteem approach, is it after somebody's name? Because all others are after names. Existential approach, there are several names. Self-esteem approach, I suspect it is in the name of Himanshu.
There are 3-4 people who have contributed to this approach.
Okay, okay.
I don't remember them right now.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote all of that in this monograph, but I don't recollect it.
Okay, okay.
one more element. Kohut also defined something called healthy narcissism. And he said, along with narcissism, you can have coexistence of these 5 good qualities, which can make healthy narcissism, which is creativity, empathy, capacity to accept one's temporality, sense of humor, and wisdom. Yes, it is here. The existential approach to narcissism is a very different approach in terms of genesis, manifestation, therapy, and cultural evaluation. It's radically different. Now, let us say people who have contributed to this. Arnold Cooper, he says, narcissism is a state where existence becomes either a search or a waiting for that moment not yet here when real life and true love will begin. The present is always imperfect in and of itself. Cultural changes have made more people with narcissistic pathology see therapists. And this may well be the spirit of the age. Everyone today wants to be on TV, national or international. Who is today not a narcissist? In fact, narcissistic goals are deemed legitimate by society. So that is his idea of it. Now, Karen Horney, she says,
Sir, what was the first name?
Arnold Cooper, 1917. I'll send you this whole thing.
Okay, sir.
Karen
Horney.
Some people say, why horny? Is she always horny? So she refers to narcissism as limited to the problem of unrealistic self-inflation and states that having a desire for admiration from others or high opinion of oneself is not narcissistic unless it traverses into an extremely unrealistic realm. She says that a person clings to illusions about himself because he has lost himself, not necessarily because an object has frustrated him.
What I remember from Karen Horney's chapter in our book was she was divorced but continued to use the married name.
So one more denial of loss.
Yeah, or maybe a good component also.
Correct.
Nothing is pointless or lost. You always gain something out of it. Learn.
So Becker, he says something different. He says, in man, a working level of narcissism is inseparable from self-esteem, from a basic sense of self-worth. If it is all too absorbing, only then an aberration. When you combine natural narcissism with the basic need of self-esteem, you create a creature who has to feel himself an object of primary value, first in the universe, representing in himself all of life. Man is hopelessly involved with himself. If everyone honestly admitted his urges to be a hero, it would be a devastating release of truth. So he talks about the universality of some degree of narcissism in everybody. Peter Marin says, the current situation of man, isolated from community, church, God, religion, values, nature, can lead him only to narcissism and loneliness. He calls it the new narcissism, one fostered by social and cultural conditions. So the existentialists have a very different take on it. For example, Christopher Lasch, he writes in his book, the title is Culture of Narcissism. He says, narcissism is a way of life that is, he says, a way of life that is dying. The competitive individualism in its pursuit of happiness has ended in a narcissistic preoccupation with barren, valueless, pathological self. Loneliness and inability to relate and be in engagement with people leads to an annihilating boredom, like animals whose instincts have withered away in captivity. And there is a threat to retreat into savagery in order to at last feel something organic and natural. So he gives a very different idea of narcissism.
Lord of the Flies was a dystopic novel by what is the Nobel Prize winning author?
Arundhati Roy.
No, some Western name. Lord of the Flies. It will come to me.
Okay.
In which he says that there is return to savagery. The plane carrying a sports team falls on an island, wrecks on an island, and only the children are saved. All the elders have gone. And one doesn't know how many children, which age, and what happens until the end of the book is depicted in that book. That is Lord of the Flies. Beelzebub is the name of the demon there on the island, and how they actually hunt a pig, and how that gives them nearly orgasmic pleasure. It's all that hunting itself becomes an act of like orgy or something.
It's also an act of emotional reconnecting. It's a very social act. It's not just a functional act. It's a very social act. It's an effort to reconnect to people, belong back to the community, reestablish attachments and bonds. One more way of looking at it is the Valley Junction model that I have proposed.
Yes.
That this can be one way to look at generation of all personality disorders, including narcissistic. And this leads to the...
Sorry, William Golding.
Yeah, correct.
The Flies.
I confused it with another title, The God of Small Things.
That is Arundhati.
Near to it. Yeah. So the Valley Junction model is based upon early life loss, leading to different personality disorders based upon the type of loss and the coping mechanisms with the individual. How early, how deep, how enduring the loss was, and what were the resources available to the person. And this led to an idea of that most personalities are mixed personality disorders. Most personality disorders are mixed personality disorders. And something happy to share is, I had those ideas many years back, and I had created a video discussion on it on my channel. And now ICD-11 recognizes that. So ICD-11 has removed the 10 personality disorders. And instead of it, they have created 4 or 5 elements which are common to all. And you can just say, these are either mild, moderate, or severe. Which again is not okay with me. I have a problem with ICD-11 also. Because I feel that they have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. That there is some merit in having the 10 personality disorders. And the solution, in my opinion, is that apart from the 10, add 1 or 2 more, and then go for mixed personality disorders. Don't throw away the entire 10. You may have to add 2 or 3, add them, and then go for mixtures of them. And that is where a good orientation to understanding will happen. Because what ICD-11 has done is they have taken some generic components of all of them, but those generic components actually are not very correctly selected. Like if I was to select generic component, I would look at the split open. I would look at catastrophic thinking. I would look at repressed anger, sadness, and guilt. I would look at idealization and de-idealization. I would look at search for omnipotence. Those things are completely missing. What you encounter in therapy of every personality disorder. So one, the selection of the common is not correct. Second, the understanding which emerges by the current description is very valuable. It doesn't have to be thrown away just because it is imperfect in one way. That is one part. Lastly, what Freud started with definition today has become like an epidemic. That there is an epidemic of narcissism in society, and essentially it's fragile narcissism, not a strong narcissism. And this is also the root of what you see the woke movement, where the psychological root of the woke movement is an anarchic rage of fragile narcissism. It almost becomes like an opposition defiant disorder against any cultural practice which has been long existing in society. It's very anarchic.
What is woke, sir?
What happened was in US, there was a feminist movement around 50s, 60s. Then there was a LGBTQ movement. And LGBTQ movement was one offshoot was this gender idea. So the idea that gender is not natural, it's assigned. And one can be anything one wants, in a sense that we are born as a blank slate. And everything is learned. Yeah.
Tabula rasa.
Yeah, the tabula rasa theory. That we are a blank slate and it's experience that writes on the slate. There's nothing natural or inevitable about it. So these three got combined, feminism, LGBTQ, gender, into what is, and race. America has this racial issue. So this four got combined into what is called the woke movement. And what happened was that the American deep state, which actually controls the American society, the world, and even American politics, like most of the US presidents are actually pre-selected by the deep state. It's a managed democracy. It's not a real democracy. And the deep state, which is constant, where the presidents come and go, but the deep state remains powerful. These are the people who control the largest funds, industries, banks. Some of the former bureaucrats, CIA chiefs, army chiefs. There is a coterie called the deep state. Now what happened was that there was a conservative deep state and a woke deep state, because some of them were homosexuals, asexual, trans people, and they had very difficult personal lives. So they wanted to change the world for all times to come. And they started this whole woke movement, and they started infiltrating the academia, industry, media, and they instituted Barack Obama as a leader. He was a managed president. Most of American presidents are managed presidents. There are very few which are actually on merit, like Kennedy was on merit. Trump is on First time was on merit, because the managed choice was Hillary Clinton and everyone thought she will win. So Trump was by accident on merit president, but once he was the president, the deep state grabbed him. And now he is an agent of the conservative deep state. So the deep state bifurcated into two, the conservative and the woke. And when the woke was finishing off America out of their stupid reasons, almost lunatic reasons, by aligning with jihadis and China, it came to a point where the army would have had to take over America. And that is where the conservative deep state reasserted itself, and Trump was made to win. The Prime Minister of New Zealand was changed. The Prime Minister of Canada was changed, because these are all managed positions. Whatever American deep state wants, only they can be there. Even in Pakistan, they changed it.
Bangladesh also. Yunus,
Yes.
Nobel, his Nobel and everything.
So Nobel itself is a managed award.
Managed.
You get it only if they want you. You are useful to them. And the most managed award is Raymond Magsaysay.
Oh,
That's the most managed award. It's almost like it's completely at the discretion of CIA. It's basically a CIA award. The Nobel Prize also has become like a CIA award now. It's almost like a part of the CTC of the US president, the variable component of his CTC.
cost to company. CTC is cost to company. Okay, okay.
So the psychological basis of the woke movement is the anarchic rage of a fragile narcissism. So we can see the application of this concept even on a global scale. And that's the reason why you can't reason with them. What they are doing is lunatic, but they just won't accept anything. Because primarily everything is coming from the unconscious.
Let them leave it out.
Yeah.
Let Kohut come back.
So one of the tragedies that you see in Ukraine also is a woke creation. Because Zelensky typically was a woke front. He's still even today a woke front. And the woke part of the deep state, after it got defeated in USA, it went to Europe. So now it's in London. So now there is a struggle between the two parts of the deep state, the conservative and the woke. And all the UK Prime Minister and the French Prime Minister, President, both are actually woke candidates. And the conservative state now wants to replace them with their own choices. And I'm sure in the next 3 to 4 years, they will go. Anyway, the unconscious psychoanalytic causation of that global movement is in fragile narcissism. Any questions which are there? This completes our chapter on narcissism by Freud.
Narcissism and greed come together. I suppose that is implicit in all this.
Correct. Correct. That is true.
This is dystopic novel we are living. It is
Very-
hard to tell children that life is worth living and world is good.
Very true.
And I believe the podcast that they brought air or broadcast, they also are slowly telling you toward how evanescent the universe is, how the earth is going to die and sun is going, all the stuff, and how insignificant you are. All that they are promoting.
So if you take to the excess, then this business of insignificance also can backfire.
Sorry.
If you take it to the extreme, then this
Uh-huh.
business of insignificance also can backfire.
Business of significance
Insignificance.
can also backfire.
Because some people use it as a tool to control narcissism.
Uh,
But if you take it to its extreme, it will result in cynicism, meaninglessness, and complete loss of confidence.
that is what Freud said to, he wrote to Reich or someone, I don't remember, that paranoids are ultimately correct and we are too insensitive. I don't remember where is that statement coming from.
Must be because Freud essentially was a pessimist.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
So if you put that line of optimism and pessimism, Freud
Uh-huh.
is the pessimistic component. So he says the goal of therapy is to make unbearable unhappiness bearable unhappiness.
Yeah. Unique misery is converted into ordinary unhappiness. That is what happens after psychoanalysis. That's what they say.
And he also said this to Einstein in his letter,
Uh-huh.
because we have that famous incident of a time when Jews were persecuted all over the world, especially Germany.
Yes.
But in the intellectual domain, Einstein was at the top of the physical intellectual enterprise, and Freud was at the top of psychological enterprise, and both were Jews. So in Second World War, Einstein wrote to Freud, okay, what is it in the human mind that this goes on? The Second World War, all the misery and destruction. And Freud says he, the forces of domination, sadism, destruction are far more powerful compared to the forces of reason, love, and peace. And no one knows how to turn it around. So he was very pessimistic about the human race. Quite distinct from Jung and Kohut and Winnicott were far more positive.
Well. I believe that comment by Nike or Wig, I think it was by Wig, that anxiety and depression are the cultural biases of the West. And there can be other cultures which are completely governed by other emotions like lust, greed, envy, and she was inspired by that. And I thought, yes, anxiety and depression are haunting the world because the developed world they have faced the two catastrophes, two world wars. So they preoccupied by fear of loss and by guilt over all the violence and loss. So why not let us ask our client, our patients, what other negative emotions do they experience? And therefore, because I found that question on cultural identity was difficult to ask and to answer for the doctors as well as the patients. So we wanted and we tried to seek elaboration on cultural identity from the population and from the patients, community and clinic, and ask them negative emotions about yearning, pining, envy, jealousy, and all those revenge, all those things. And we found that anger and rage were 90%.
90%?
90%. We had about 400 people interviewed,
Ah,
200 patients and 200 community slum participants. We found that the anger was reported as the predominant emotion, negative emotion, by 90% people, close to
right.
90%. It is unpublished yet. The data are still with me, but they are now 12-year-old, and I don't find people to work on that. and all the other negative emotions also were acknowledged by people in our culture, and there were differences. Community people did not blame parents or family, whereas clinical population, the patients, they did have a lot of complaints against family.
So one of the professors I once talked with, he made a very interesting comment.
Mhm.
He said, there are two things that Indian culture has not been able to manage very well.
Reconcile.
One is envy,
Mhm.
and second is this concept of otherness.
Mhm.
We other the others very quickly. Like this whole othering concept.
आपल्यातला नाहीये.
Huh?
हा आपल्यातला नाहीये.
So in terms of subcaste, caste, region, this constant othering of the others, that othering process we have not been able to manage well. We use it far too often and at far more levels than normal societies will do. There's too much of othering. And the second is envy. And third he said was the participative and collective celebration. That we don't do enough of participative and collective celebration. Like one is celebrating and the other is envious. We don't do much participative and collective celebration. I think these three, apart from other things like fairness, positivity, courage, these have been the continuous bane of our culture for many centuries now.
One of our friends, author, he's a playwright and an author. He's a thinker. He's an ENT surgeon, gold medalist, but does all this yoga and yoga sutras, Patanjali, and he says that we don't know how to appreciate the other one. We can't give kautuk to other person.
There's too much of envy.
Too much of it. Yes, sir.
Shall we stop for the day?
We'll stop for the day. We'll think of something to do together.
Okay. See you.
That will be great. Thank you, sir.